it made me realize that I needed to do what I love. And there's no point on waiting. We had many projects sort of in mind that we had said we would do, and we never did. And they were all artist projects. And we never got around to them. And there was always reasons. Life was busy, this was happening, or, oh, we'll get to it, or I'm not sure, or, And then it kind of clicked. And I was like, wait a second. If you don't do it now, you don't do it.
Hello, and welcome to the Connect podcast. This show is all about helping you connect to your soul's calling so you can take action on it. Because the sweetest success is a blend of discovering your purpose with the inner drive to bring it to life. I'm Sheila Botello, health coach, lifestyle entrepreneur, and mom of two, best known for my online wellness programs, mentoring, and self-love passion. Listen in for inspiring interviews, solo chats, and Q&A sessions that will move you past overwhelm towards what lights you up. Stop accepting good enough and go for your version of great in your health, business, and relationships. Let's get started. Hey, welcome to today's interview. I'm thrilled to introduce you to my guest, who happens to be a childhood friend whose creativity and way of life has inspired me for years. I truly believe the arts are deeply connected to our health and well-being. Alanna Peters is a Toronto-based painter and educator. Her work is predominantly figurative oil painting on birch wood panels. She was born and raised in Ottawa, Canada. As a young adult, she moved around Canada, England, France, Guyana, and Burkina Faso before coming to Toronto in 2010. Alanna received her BFA from McMaster University and a B.Ed for arts-based education from Queen's University. Over the past 20 years, she has worked as an artist, arts educator, and textile designer. Alanna's paintings explore the interaction between the abstract qualities of the environment and the detailed realism of the figure. Alanna's paintings are found in private and public collections in Canada, France, Australia, the United States, Germany, and Uganda. Alanna presently exhibits her work in Toronto, London, and Ottawa. She splits her time between her studio practice as an arts educator and as a mother of three. If you've ever felt the nudge to explore your creativity or to finally get started on that passion project, this episode may just get you into action. Enjoy the conversation. Hi, Alanna. So good to see you. I'm glad you could make it today.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here as well. It's so nice to see you.
It really is. And the beauty of technology, how we can actually stay in touch, at least through, you and I have both been through a lot over the last number of years.
Yes.
And it's been nice to be able to be there, hold space for each other, even though it has been like via messages and things like that. And I think the connection that we had as kids, it's just kind of when you come together, it feels like you haven't been apart for as long as you actually have. And all those memories kind of just come rolling back into your memory.
Oh, for sure. There's definitely a connection. And it's easy. It's an easy transition back to talking and seeing each other, for sure.
It is. And I love where you're situated in your studio with your paintings around you. And whenever I think of you, I think of these color palettes that you've chosen. They're so beautiful. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to dive into the art, but I want to go into some history. I love to go back to the beginning and let listeners know, and even myself, because I realized some of these questions that I was thinking of, I thought, I've never asked you this. And so it's going to be fun exploration for me, right? Because when you know someone, you just know them. Yeah. But when you actually dive in with specific questions, it's beautiful to have that context. Because I know art's been a part of your life for a very long time, but we're going to go back to the beginning. And you grew up in Ottawa. I would love if you, right off the bat, if you can think of what is your favorite childhood memory?
Oh my goodness. I guess I would say the freedom I had. I was an only child, so I spent a lot of time wandering around on my own with my own imaginary world. And we had a park right by my house, which ran along the river, and I could go for miles on it. And I think that freedom, that sense of freedom, I really, really loved. And that sense of imagination. Yeah. I was often wandering off though, which maybe my parents didn't enjoy, but I enjoyed. Yeah.
That's amazing. And I remember doing the same thing when I was a kid, living on a dirt road. And I wouldn't
Mhm.
often wander alone, but there were always kids around. And so even though it was probably technically safer than being in the downtown portion, or you weren't really downtown Ottawa, but you're in near the
Yeah,
core. So it's a busy enough area, but it was also a different time. And I think we
it
had
was.
that freedom to be able to know that the neighbors are looking out for you, and you knew your neighbors and you knew the people who you'd see on a day-to-day
Yeah.
basis when you're out and about. And I know the trail along the river that you're talking about because it's right behind the building my mother and father had moved into
Yep.
several years ago. And yeah, I remember walking that trail when my sister was ill and when she was in
Yeah.
hospital, and that was the trail that was so restorative to me. So I think it's so
It
amazing
is.
that you and I even have the connection to that
That
trail.
trail, yeah.
And I can
No, for
only
sure.
imagine the imagination that you tapped into and the things that you were wondering about when you were a girl.
Yeah.
And do you find that nature informed a lot even early on in your artistry and in your investigation of creativity?
I think so. It's sort of an indirect way. I think it's more looking at how the light plays on things that really interested me. And I loved the water of the river, and I spent most of my time sort of either on its banks, like digging for things or catching frogs or whatever, or just watching it and just sitting with my dog and watching it. So there's something
Mhm.
about that definitely informed, especially what I'm doing now. Um, and it's just that light that I was fascinated with.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
and you really pick up on it in your current art for sure. And, it's interesting, I just had a thought, you wandering along as a child and having your dog with you, that really never stopped for you because you've wandered a lot. We're gonna talk even more about kind of the different places you've lived and things you've done.
yeah,
It's not been just like a linear path. You've had some
no.
adventurous experiences, and I guess it all started in childhood, which is so cool. And now we've talked about this before, but I'd love for you to share with listeners what drew you to art and painting in the first place?
I actually have no idea. It just always was there.
Wow.
Um, my mom basically filled our basement with craft and art supplies, and I had free range. And it was my space, and it was my place to do whatever I wanted and to make my mess because the rest of the house was very neat and tidy. So it was definitely my space, and it was always there. Yeah, it was just always available. So I don't know at what point. I think as young as I could have been to hold crayons or Play-Doh or whatever was when it all started. And I don't know. And my father was very artistic. So
Mhm.
any artist project or idea or whatever concept I had, he would be more than happy to sit down with me and like help it come to life. Yeah.
Oh,
So yeah.
I have
I don't
always
know.
loved watching the close connection that you had with your parents. And I know, yes, being an only child, maybe that was part of it, but I think it was just the ethos of your family because I've known only children who weren't very close with their parents. So
Yeah.
it's something they cultivated. And I love that they really empowered you to find your way and to discover and to play and get curious. And
Yeah.
we lived in an era where things were not over programmed. So it gave you that space to be
Yeah.
able to do that.
Yeah, definitely.
Um,
And they encouraged it. They encouraged the creativity for sure.
yeah, I always felt like there was so much love there in your family. And now, in recent years, you lost your dear father, and he
Yeah.
was such a good man. He
Yeah.
had this
He was.
quiet strength about him, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Oh, and having lost my parents, over
as
the last
well.
several
Yeah.
years, it impacts every area of life. And I'm wondering, how
Yes.
has art given you peace and helped you heal through your grief?
Well, when my father passed, I was doing other creative ventures. I was doing more like silk screening on textiles and kids' clothing and stuff. I had put painting aside as my kids were too little, and I didn't want them getting into the mess mostly. Um, but when he passed, it made me realize that I needed to do what I love. And there's no point on waiting. So I guess with my father, we had many projects sort of in mind that we had said we would do, and we never did. And they were all artist projects, like art projects. And we never got around to them. There was always reasons. Life was busy. This was happening, or, oh, we'll get to it, or I'm not sure, or, and then it kind of clicked. And I was like, wait a second, if you don't do it now, you don't do it, basically.
Yes.
And I went back to the water. So it's interesting that you said that you walked along that path by the river when your sister was ill, because that was the first place I went to when my father was in hospital. So I would spend, when I wasn't in the hospital with him, I would spend my time along that path. And then when he finally passed, that was where I went to. And so that water kept calling me back. And that's when I started painting with water. And there was definitely a link to the whole emotional feel. And you can see it in the first water paintings. They're very darker water, heavier. There's a lot of weight to the figure. And that's because that was what I was feeling. Those were my emotions at that time.
So beautiful that you had those two places to go to process your emotions, nature, and then also creativity. They really are intertwined. And oh my gosh, it just gave me chills when you told me that.
Oh.
Wow. I didn't know that, but it makes so much sense because of course your mother lives right there.
Yeah.
I feel like just this one part of the conversation could go on for so long because there's so much to unpack, and how we process our grief, how we move through it, how we have the highs and lows, and how you go through that period of time where you question, like, why does life feel normal right now? It shouldn't feel normal. There's something missing. What's going on? And then you just kind of roll with it. And then it all comes in waves. And people who, I'm sure so many people listening have dealt with their own areas of grief in their life, especially perhaps over the last year. I think grief has taken on a different kind of look because people are grieving the loss of freedom, a loss of so many other things. And yet I am hearing more and more about people returning to nature and finding ways to move through. I think that's the key, right? It's moving through it, because we can just get stuck if we don't address it, if we don't allow those emotions to rise and channel them into something. And you were able to channel them into art.
Yeah. And I find it fascinating because if I look at my work since my dad's passing, I can see the progress of where I am emotionally in my color palettes, in the weight of the figures in the work, in the reflections, and as it progresses along, it gets a lot brighter and a lot more color and a lot more weightlessness to the work. So it's an interesting visual path, I would say, like a visual depiction of my own path.
Oh, for sure. Looking back a little bit, you studied fine arts at McMaster University and then art-based learning at Queen's University. How did those experiences open you up to the possibilities of where an artist's life could take you? Do you still maintain connections or collaborate with people that you met in those programs also?
So fine arts, I kind of went in not knowing whether I could get in. I guess that was kind of my initial challenge. It's like, hey, can I do it? And then when I got accepted, I was like, wow, I can. And I loved it in the fine art program. I loved the feeling of the studio. I felt at home, like I felt in the right place in the work that I was doing. But when I came out, I discovered how complex the art industry is. Like lots of industries, but it's not an easy venue and it's not an easy path to take. So I experimented with teaching art. I experimented with working in galleries, and I just discovered over a bit of time that I much preferred the teaching of art than the gallery work. The administrative stuff was not for me. And so I went on to the Queen's arts-based learning because I was like, well, this is something I like to do as well. So it's an education degree, but it's focused on using the arts. So it wasn't just visual arts. It was acting, it was singing, it was music. How do you incorporate all these things to teach all subjects? So it was also a space that I felt very connected to. And it gave me sort of, in a sense, two paths that are linked, and that can support each other in a way, so that the education side can be sort of a steady job and income that allows my my connection with people, part of me that needs to be thriving, to exist. And then my sort of more inner side of me that needs my own time and space and my visual painting and to exist as well. So it's kind of like the two paths were able to coexist.
What grade do you teach right now?
I teach grade 1, 2.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So you're able to dive into also not only your professional education, but also your childhood memories of, okay, let's see. I was in my basement with all of the things around me and I could do anything I wanted. And so you understand what it's like to be a child and looking at all these different areas of artistry and how a child's mind wraps itself around that stuff. So that's kind of fun.
And I
And
think I like to still think that way.
I'm in favor of never growing up. I never want to grow up ever.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'm still there a lot of the time.
And all of my creative friends will agree with you on that. It is like life can be so heavy. And
Yeah.
where do we go to get lighter and to escape and to relax? It's the arts in all forms.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's a different way of being than the rest of life. I don't know how to explain it. It's a different way of thinking.
It is. Well, you said a word. You said experiment. You said, I experimented with this and I experimented with that in terms of deciding your direction. And I think it's never too late in our lives for us to experiment something new. We can very easily pigeonhole ourselves into something that we decided 10 years ago, but we change and we grow. And why not experiment?
Oh, for sure.
I think that'll be a gift for the younger generation coming up now, where things are changing and pivoting so quickly that that's just going to come more naturally to them.
Yeah, that's true.
Do you find you have like an artist tribe, perhaps some people that followed along and been on the journey for the same amount of time as you from school or throughout your travels?
I think I have lots of different little groups, I would say. I'm still in contact with a couple of the women I was in fine arts with, but sort of on a casual basis. We're doing totally different things now, which is it's interesting. But I feel like at least in Toronto, I have begun building a very strong artist network. We see each other at regular shows or through Instagram. It's actually, we've created quite a good communication and support network between each other. And it's, that's more of a newer group, I would say. It's in the past couple of years. But yeah. And then the traveling is a whole other group of people who are very supportive of my creative side. And even though that's not what they do, in a sense, it's very different from our connection, but they are very supportive of it. And it's really nice to have sort of a cheering squad, even from different sides of my life. Yeah.
Oh, yes. We need more cheerleaders. And I don't know if that's why I'm a cheerleader of the people in my life and the people I get to know. I guess you realize as you go through life and you're trying different things, and very often, I mean, being an artist and following your journey as well of just different places you've gone in your life and things you've done, it is unconventional. So it is nice if you can have people cheering you on. And so it's been similar for myself. A lot of the decisions I've made are maybe not the conventional thing to do. So it's not easy to take a different route. So when you see something where someone's doing that, it is beautiful to support and elevate, because we need to have that cheering squad. So you have traveled a lot, Alanna. I'm curious, it all started on the riverbank, right? But what ignited that in you? And I'd love if you'd share a timeline of your travels.
Oh my goodness. I guess the first actual flight I took on my own, I was 8. So that was kind of like, hey, look, I can get on a plane.
Wow.
I was just going to visit my best friend in Saskatoon, but that didn't matter. I still got on a plane. And I think also the fact that my father was from England and half of our family was over there, it just made the world seem a bit smaller, like more accessible. And I would go over to England to visit my grandma and my aunts. So it was just, yeah, sure. We just hop on a plane and we end up somewhere else. So I think at at a very young age, it just seemed normal to be able to do that. I don't know. I was always curious in understanding how the world is and how people are in different spaces, because we're very different, but very much the same everywhere. And it all depends sort of on the context of how our lives are and the cultures that build up around it. And I was always fascinated by that. And that's probably why I've chosen to go to very different places as well. Like traveling through Asia, or, living in West Africa, or living in South America. They're all very different cultural contexts, and it's fascinating. I love it.
Yeah. Well, you love meeting people, and you married a man from France. We
Yeah.
need to ask, okay, how did you meet your husband? Tell us all about this.
That was actually, he was the exchange student. He came to McMaster, but we actually met through a really good friend of ours. She had gone to France the year before my husband came over, and they'd become friends. And when he came to Canada, because she was like, well, our universities are linked. If you want to do it in English, it's a great place. She introduced us because he was an engineer, and he was like, I'm kind of looking for someone who's the opposite of an engineer. I'd love to meet someone who's artistic. And so she introduced the two of us. And we always joke that she has a lot of influence on our life, whether she meant to or not.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So has Boris gotten more creative since you've been together? And have you gotten more kind of analytical, pragmatic being together?
I would say he was already very creative. He comes from a very creative family as it is. I mean, his mother, she paints, and she's also an incredible woodworker. She basically built most of their house. His sister's a potter. His other sister is a dancer. So, I mean, he comes from a very creative group. And I mean, he plays music with the kids, and he's teaching them electric guitar right now. So he's got, yeah, that was my daughter's wish this year for Christmas. I want an electric guitar. So he's got a very creative side. I don't know that my analytical, logical side has increased, to be honest. I have my own sort of version of logic that I think is kind of the way I'm stuck. Yeah.
You know what? And that's why we have each other. You can balance each other out.
Yeah.
I'm definitely the creative one, and Peter is very analytical, very structured, accounting, finance background. And I have found we've both kind of come a little bit towards each other's side, which is kind of neat. But it's just been a lot of years. And I think having children has really increased that, because one of my sons plays guitar as well, and my husband's very much into classic rock. And so that was a nice influence on that element. It's kind of neat to see how things change and flow as you are together for a while.
Yeah.
So lovely.
Yeah.
And now the two of you also, you and Boris, have such a global connection because you have done a lot of the traveling together as well. Yeah. And I've watched as you've done some beautiful work in the world. What are some of the organizations that you've partnered with and the deeper connections that have come out of them?
Well, I went to South America with, it was through Queen's University, working with teachers as I was doing a teacher's degree. So working with teachers in rural communities. So that came through my degree and their sort of social outreach program. And that was a very eye-opening. I really enjoyed it, and connecting with the small community and understanding their challenges, especially since a lot of these communities have like 100+ kids per class, because they don't have the same funding that we have, or the same, teaching that we have. And a lot of it was, either canoe into schools as well. And so it was a very interesting experience, especially learning that, a lot of my strategies that I'd, just recently learned in education didn't work because you had to think completely differently and completely creatively, because there was no resources. There was no, we just didn't have the same context. So that's why I went down to South America. And then when we went to West Africa, it was with Engineers Without Borders Canada, which is an organization working, it's changed dramatically over the past few years, but working in development, especially within sub-Saharan Africa. And that's where my husband is still working. Actually, he's
Mhm.
there as the CEO. So he's kind of worked his way through the organization from volunteer um, up as well. So
That's
uh,
awesome.
we still have a very global outreach, and we still have really good friends and connections from there. And yeah, and our kids. It's interesting because our kids know a lot about Africa, especially when they were very little, and it's kind of fascinating because a lot of people wouldn't really know as much as they do and have the connections. Or we have a balafon, which is like a xylophone specifically from a region that was made for us from a griot that's sitting under our couch so that it can be pulled out whenever anyone wants to.
I
Or
love that.
random things like that around our house. It's a lot of connection, I guess.
Oh, yeah. And to be able to bring your children on this journey and to have this conversation about the world, about
Yeah.
how we are a global community,
Mhm.
and how no matter where you come from or what your specialty is in your life, you can use that to benefit others
Yeah.
and make a
Definitely.
beautiful difference. I love seeing the way that you spur on your children's artistry. And obviously, you're just followed in
Yes.
your parents' footsteps here. Do you find that it's come really naturally to them as a result of watching you and watching Boris as well? And how have you embedded your artistic instincts into your teaching and into your mothering of your children?
Oh. Yeah, so definitely, I think it came naturally to providing the space and the stuff. Much to Boris's frustration sometimes because there's large piles of messes and random things that are kept, like piles of recycling and whatever. Yes, he calls me the messy one. I'm the one that allows mess. Um, yeah, I think they've always grown up in it, so it comes naturally for them to be confident to try.
Mhm.
I find it fascinating as they get older because we start to see where their interests lie more and where their own personal directions are. So, for years, my son would paint and do other things with us, but he's really much more a sculptor. Like he
Mhm.
loves sculpting, and so he's totally shifted in the last little while. And we're providing him with the opportunities like mold making kits or just even plaster and making it so that he can carve it out and getting him pieces of wood. And he always is collecting stumps or tree things that he finds in the forest to somehow or other carve. So I think it's understanding as well where the interests lie. So, providing him with real tools. So he has
Mhm.
real chisels and, he's 10, but that's okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love that.
Whereas my daughter is very much, she's shifting more into wanting to design clothes and design things. So, we're starting to like figure out, okay, well, how do you make, a clothing pattern? And if you want to sew it, well, which materials can you use? So we're starting to, they're venturing from the initial like experimenting with paints and other things to what's interesting them, which is fascinating. And my youngest, well, she's still just experimenting basically and making a mess. She is a pure tornado in all aspects of her life. But yeah, so it's fun. I think it's also just in recognizing in them as well. Like with my one daughter, I realized that she didn't learn visually, whereas my son did. And having to recognize that she needs to learn kinesthetically. She needs to move. She needed to be dancing. She needed that
Mhm.
physical to understand anything. So it's kind of a learning journey, I would say, but it's fascinating to see how they grow and change into themselves as
Yeah.
well.
And the fact that you're supporting them through that and giving them the space to uncover, well, how do I learn best and
Yeah.
what things do interest me, being able to support them. It's a beautiful privilege to
They
have
do make
that
a mess in the studio though. They have their corner.
just in the corner.
It tends to, keep going, but
Oh, well, let's talk about some of your pieces. You alluded to how they've kind of evolved over the last number of years. You've created what I believe to be a stunning brand, really, of art and the concepts of impermanence through the use
yeah.
of light and movement, as you say. And I personally love the colors and the detail that come through. How did the idea of this type of painting come to you?
somewhere around second year of my fine arts, I discovered figurative work. Before that, I only did abstract. And ever since that moment, I fell in love with it. I have to do figurative work. So there has to be a figure somehow or other incorporated in my work. I think it's also the connection with traveling and meeting people, and that need to connect on the human level, more so than just a color level or a shape level. Like there's something about that emotional connection that I need to evoke in my work. And the water really came from when my dad passed and that experience. So, but it's evolved in the sense of really becoming a fascination with how does the light work and how does it like transform what I'm looking at, because underwater things can get distorted or a bit, they move around a bit, and light can be quite fascinating. It dances as well through the water. And that's when I started incorporating a lot of the fabric as well to see how the movement and the weightlessness would come through it, which I think is also a link to my love of fabric. I have a whole cupboard full of African fabric that we brought home. I just have always loved fabric, and that's why I used to, do silk screening on fabrics, and I used to design kids' clothes. As I love fabric as well. So there's a tie into my painting as well from another part of me. I would say. Yeah, I don't know. It's evolving. I think the water has really created like a blend for me in being able to play with abstraction and play with emotions and play with the human form in a way that I couldn't get in another context. If that makes sense.
It does. It does. It is so unique. Now, you have an extensive website. I'm going to link that in the show notes so people can see the pieces that you've created. Do you still do commissions? And how does this work for people who live at a distance? And what is your virtual process?
I do some commissions per year. I mean, I'm in I would say, a very busy phase of my life right now with 3 young children and working. Basically, I say I work 3 jobs. So I only take a couple of of commissions per year. And for that, I work with the person. I will kind of get the idea of what they're looking for in terms of the feeling, the mood, colors, and then I will send usually a couple of sketches, and then we work from there to create it. And it usually takes, I would say, on average, about a month to create a piece, at least once the painting has started, because I'm a slow painter. In general, there's a lot of details that go into things, so it does take a lot of time, and there's a lot of layers of my paintings because I paint very thinly with oils so that the layers underneath interact with the layers on top. So there's also a lot of waiting in between so that things can dry so that you can go on top. So yeah, and so if it depends on where someone is, I usually paint on wood, and it depends on the size. So locally, it's pretty easy to take a very large wood piece and deliver. Internationally, it would then have to be more on stretched canvas so that you can roll it instead. So it depends kind of on where it's going and how big.
Oh, it's just so eye-catching. And I think it's great that you've got all these different varieties of art pieces available on your website. You do prints as well of certain sizes. That's really accessible for someone just wanting to enter into the art world, into really a beautiful brand, I believe, of art. And you are often a highlight at art showings throughout Toronto and other parts of Ontario. And I noticed you had some online viewings throughout 2020 because they normally would have been in person. How did you find the virtual art showings?
2020 has definitely been a strange year. So much has closed down and shut down. So it's a lot of, I guess, just sort of browsing, looking, going to the names in which you know most, because there's a lot out there and there's a lot that's not great. So it's being picky and choosy on what I apply to. And to be honest, I find that the online art is not the greatest venue. Art really needs to be experienced. It really needs to be seen in order to feel it. And seeing a picture just, it doesn't quite convey what a painting conveys. So, I mean, it works a little bit, you sell here and there, but it doesn't work as well as when it's in a gallery or when it's in an art fair, where you connect with the actual people who are purchasing, and they can connect with you and the piece. And it's a very different experience. So I've been trying the online. I find it touch and go, but it's where we are, and it's the reality of what's going to be probably in the future as well. It's going to become more common. And I think as it becomes more common, maybe it'll become people will be more used to viewing art that way. Mm-hmm. But I think it's still in the infancy stage. But
yes. And I think as things start to open up a bit, there will be more live art experiences, because I agree with you, having been to the National Gallery, been to other galleries around the world where you're standing in front of this piece of art, that the size and scale also really impacts how you feel about it. So yes, being right in front of it and really seeing all the detail that you would not otherwise see, it does make a huge difference.
Yeah.
I love your new studio, because I saw when it was under construction, you had it, you had photos up on Instagram, and 2020, what a great time for you to have built it. What now with teaching, with everything that you're doing, and then fitting painting in, like, it does feel like you're really busy painting too. What does a typical weekly creative schedule look like for you?
Well, this year has been pretty exceptional as well, in the sense of, one week we're basically in person learning for school, and then the next week we're online, and somehow or other you have to completely spin on a dime and change your whole way of doing things constantly. So it's been a fascinating challenge, I would say, that way. But the art, I basically work during the day from 8 till 3 teaching. I come home, there's a lot of time with my kids. So I bring my kids home. Well, my youngest and my older two can walk home. Mm-hmm. And so then it's like, it's the kid time. So it's the snack time and talk and remind them, practice your piano. It's what homework do we have to do? Let's get outside and play, that kind of time. And then it's dinner time, and that all gets done. And then once they go to bed, that's my time. And I have to make it a very conscious effort that is my studio time. So I usually go into the studio after they're asleep until about, 10 or 11, wherever I make it to. And then weekends is also my time in the studio. So it's kind of where I can squeeze it in, fit it in. Having the studio space has changed things dramatically, because for a long time I was using the middle bedroom until my third child was born. And then I lost my my studio and I moved into the dining room, which was definitely not ideal, having a corner in the dining room. But it did provide me with the chance to work when my youngest was home before I had returned to teaching, because she could be crawling around and I always knew where she was, and we could interact and I could paint and at the same time. Mm-hmm. But this space came about because we had a garage that we didn't use. It was just full of, most things we got rid of. This was just full of junk. And my husband, when we went into the first lockdown in March last year, he's not one for sitting idle, even though he works a lot of hours online, but he was not one for sitting idle. So and we'd always talked about transforming it. So he basically transformed this whole space. And he insulated the whole place, put in the skylights, which makes it a whole other space than just like the light is incredible. Plus like 2 double doors that open. Like there's so much natural light in here. It's almost like our neighbors call it our cottage, because they're like, it's like you escape your house and you go to the cottage, even though it's only 5 steps away. But there's a definite feel that changes when you step into the space, because you're no longer at home. You don't have to worry about the dishes or the whole mountain of laundry. You step away from that and you can be very effective. And I find that, like, having 3 kids and working and everything, I've learned how to turn on when I need to turn on to do certain things. So it's like, okay, now is my time. Click, now get to work. And I'm more effective with my time in general than I used to be when I had more time.
It's interesting how that happens. Kids tend to bring that flavor to life, don't
Yeah. Like I have 20 minutes. How can I use it?
they? Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's funny, but it works. Yeah, I remember like in university, it's like, oh, you have to be in the mood to paint. No, you don't. You just need to go now and focus.
I find the same thing with writing and even with music. I've been getting back into playing and just for my own creativity. And it's true. It's very easy to say, oh, I don't have time. I don't have time. I'm not really in the mood. But when you just say, okay, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to turn it on and start playing away and start singing away or writing,
Yeah,
everything just comes.
it
I
does.
feel that is so, so true. We do need to create a structure, but then
Mhm.
also have a lot of grace around that structure for those days when, say, you're
Doesn't work.
feeling the energy's not there and just saying, "Hey, you know what? But I showed up for myself."
Yeah,
That's that is what is the key there, is
exactly.
showing up for it. Because going back to what you said at the very beginning of our chat, if not now, when? Right? We can think about all these things that we want to do and think, well, it's not the right time. It's not the right time. And true, that does play a part. There are seasons in our life. However, we can spend our whole life waiting for the right time and then never ever do it.
Never
So I'm
having it.
so
Yeah.
happy for you that you have made that realization and you're bringing it to life. And what's even better is that both you and Boris are showing your kids,
Yeah.
just do it, just explore, just
Yeah.
investigate, let's try.
Yeah.
And you can always change your mind and you're going to grow and change, just as your art has
Yeah.
evolved. Everything we do well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the biggest realizations I've had in the last little while is that I'm a much nicer person in all aspects of my life if I take the time to paint. So if I'm going to have patience with my kids and be a very happy, energetic teacher, if I haven't painted, well, those are going to go down. And so, sometimes you're exhausted at the end of the day and you're like, oh, I don't want to do anything. But it's like, if I don't, it'll suffer on so many other fronts.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. Absolutely. And that goes for even things like outside of the creative stuff, but just taking the time for yourself to do whatever it is that you enjoy,
Yeah.
even if it's like reading a good book or going and meeting up with a friend, like right now for like a socially distanced walk or something, right? Or having that phone call, because we can feel just like we're on a treadmill and there's no joy. So we have to build in those parts of joy in our life. And I think that really spoke right now to people who they have artistic tendencies, but they've never really taken the time for
Mhm.
it. Just for them to know it's never too late.
No.
Just
No.
take a step. And for anyone who is listening, who's creative and who thinks, ooh, I would love to, I've always wanted to paint, I've always wanted to try. I'm going to be sharing Alanna's Instagram feed as well to you. So you can just follow along her journey and just see what she does. And I find that's inspiring. It makes me want to pick up some paint and start painting also. And for those who are up and coming artists who are struggling to find their niche, how can they keep going and keep their creativity alive while not burning out? Any tips?
One of the things I have learned, because you get a lot of rejection in this field for all sorts of reasons, and not necessarily your work, which are the reasons, is that you just need to be true to what you want to create. So if you're trying to create work that fits some genre or fits some in some way, it's not going to work. It's not going to come across as authentic and it's not going to be you. I realized that like I could paint pictures that could be pretty over a couch, but that wasn't why I was painting. I'm painting because I I want to connect with the viewer. I want them to connect on an emotional level and an intellectual level and on a very personal level, not just on an aesthetic level. So you have to be authentic to what you want to create. And I think one of the things I've also learned, mainly because I think having kids and getting older, is that you can't juggle all the balls. So you just got to let some drop. And it's okay. You're like, I can't deal with that ball right now. And I'm going to just keep going with these ones. So you have to pick and choose what you can accomplish, because you can't do it all. Like it's not possible. And then sometimes it's like, oh, I missed all those opportunities. Oh, well, there'll be other ones. yeah, you just have to accept and be kind, because otherwise you'll be constantly saying to yourself, but, oh, I missed that and I haven't done that. Or, yeah, you can't. You have to just let some of them drop.
I mean, we're in a very visual, very connected social media culture where every day we can feel like we're missing out on hundreds of things. But let's
Yeah.
be honest, what can we realistically accomplish in a day? And
Yeah.
is it really our thing? We
Yeah.
can appreciate what other people are doing and say, hey, that's great. And maybe use that as fuel for what our unique expression is. But
Mhm.
really making that, I love that you shared that. I think so many people can translate that into every area of their life.
Yeah.
Creativity aside, like into our careers, into other passions that we have, into even connections with other people, relationships,
Yeah.
into our business ideas. I talk a lot about self-care,
Mhm.
and I really believe that the arts are such an important part of elevating our well-being, whether it's
Yeah.
music or drama, dance, visual art. You're often surrounded by paint and canvas, which
Yeah.
seems like that really, really fills you up. What are some other forms of self care that you partake in to support your creativity, your marriage, and motherhood?
I think there's some of that I know I need to improve on, to be honest. There's definitely going, as we said earlier, into nature. So we definitely take our family out into nature and into for hikes and on bike rides, and know all sorts of the nooks and crannies within Toronto and like the area around, in order to escape
Mhm.
escape the city. So there's a lot of that happens within our family, and that does us a world of good. Sometimes it's just like the simple, I'm just checking out and taking a bath, to be honest, and it's
Mhm.
closing that door and having the 20 minutes of peace and quiet, or somewhat peace and quiet as the chaos is outside, but not having to deal with it. I know that's one of my things. I'm like, I need to do more, but at the same time, as I said earlier, you have to let some balls go. And one day I know I'll have more time to do some of the other things that I think, like, even just traveling, that's something, I mean, we can't do right now. And that for me is self-care in a weird way.
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
It fills me up in so many ways, and we just can't. So, it'll happen. It's just waiting and being patient. So,
And I think you said something really powerful there about it can be so simple. And it's not about I need to do more of this stuff. It's about really creating more space in our lives.
mhm.
And that in and of itself is self care. Having just a moment to sit and kind of look at cloud formation
Yeah.
or just
Why
have really
Yeah.
savor what you're eating or a cup of
Mhm.
tea, just really take that in and instead of feeling like we've got to be running, running, running. And I'm hoping that's what a lot of people have taken away from this past year and a bit is
Mhm.
there's so much beauty in slowing down. And really it helps us regenerate our well-being
Yeah,
for sure. Our mindset, everything, it puts everything into perspective.
it
If we
does.
never take rest, if we never slow down, life just keeps speeding up. And then you start to not get joy from anything that you're doing.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure.
Alanna, I so appreciate you being here and sharing your
Thank
story.
you.
And it's so inspiring for me. Please tell listeners where they can find and follow you and acquire some of your art.
So on Instagram, I definitely have a lot of my process work as well. So it shows you how my work is created, which is kind of fun. And that's at Alanna_Peters, Alanna with two M's. And then my webpage is also my name. So it's at alannapeters.com. And on there is all my work available or already sold, but just to get an idea of all the work that I have. And right now I have actually I'm in two online exhibits at the moment this week. So I'm trying to keep it busy. So there's Screen Time by the Artist Project, because this year the Artist Fair wasn't able to go forward in person, which is unfortunate because it's usually a very, very good art fair. So they're doing something called Screen Time. So today launched a group exhibit that I'm involved in. And I'm also involved in another group exhibit through Kefi Art Gallery at the moment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. And to those listening, thanks for joining us. I hope this conversation gives you a dose of inspiration to tap into your own version of creativity, Make sure that you go over to Alanna's beautiful artwork at the places she mentioned. They're also going to be linked in the show notes for this episode. And now, Alanna and I would love to hear what ideas or thoughts came up for you as you listen today. Please tag us on Instagram at Sheila A. Botello or at Alanna_Peters to let us know. It's so helpful as we move forward. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you so much for being here with me on the Connect podcast. If you like this episode, please share it with someone you think would enjoy it. Also, if you head over to iTunes to leave a review, I'd be so grateful. Let us know what your favorite parts were and what you'd like to hear more of. It will help us have a greater impact, elevating many more people to grow and succeed together. See you next time.